This is just. Is it actually looking? Can you see? Yeah. Are we getting that? Is it good? Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Angel Newman, Vice President of the Providence Public School Board. I'm stepping in to facilitate in case of President Stevens tonight. He needs to be out. It is December 10th, 2025. I'd like to call this special meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Jenny Mercado.
Here.
19 Mahingabu.
Here.
Stephen Williamson.
Here.
Corey Jones.
Here.
Michelle Fox.
Here.
And Angel Luna.
Here.
You have a quorum.
We have a quorum, okay? With that, we'll move to item 2.0, public comment. Do we have anyone here to provide feedback on the goals and guardrails? And I'm sorry, that's 2.1. So anyone here to provide feedback on goals and guardrails from the public? Okay. With that said, we'll move on to item 3, discussion items. 3.1 draft goals and guardrails. Throughout the goals and guardrails feedback process, board leadership heard clearly that the community wants our guardrails reframed, flipped, or remixed into statements that positively affirm our shared values and reflect a unified effort between the board and the superintendent. Many felt the existing guardrails signaled division rather than collaboration and did not inspire confidence or alignment. So one of the items that you have before you tonight that has the yellow are reframed guardrails in a positively affirming tone for your consideration. We will look at that later on tonight. But first, what we're going to do is turn to the information that was provided to us by Ms. Lisa DiMartino by way of Dr. Dillon, which are the interim goals and interim goals that they came up with as part of the revision process that we've been going through this fall. Lisa, did you want to present any piece of this, or do you think it would be better for the board to take a minute to look at this?
But I'll just preview that. This is still a draft. We don't think it's ready for full. Like, we pulled out some of the interim measures because we've not gotten feedback from the council yet, and didn't want to put forward that as a public document since we were unclear. And there's a few questions we have about like goal 5 in particular that we had talked about the other day. But yeah, you've seen the goals and guardrails in the different earlier at an earlier board meeting, and so the interim measures that we presented here are more proposed measures without sort of baseline targets assigned to them yet.
Thank you so much. And just as a reminder for folks watching from home tonight, the board conducted community listening sessions between the months of July and September, where we went out, held about 20 community listening sessions, gathered feedback about what students should know and be able to do by the time they leave PPSD. The board then worked with RIDE. We also worked with the Council of Great City Schools and the district to develop these 5 goals and 4 guardrails. We have now this fall been soliciting feedback on those drafts, and we're moving towards finalization and adoption for January. This special meeting tonight is to look at the interim goals that Dr. Dillon and her team put together, as well as those guardrails that we'll talk about after this. On the 17th, we'll provide space for public comment, further discuss what we have before us, and then again move towards adoption in January. So let's just take a minute to look at the Providence, at the top of the page where it says Providence Public School District draft statement. If we could take a couple of minutes to review that ourselves, and then if there's any questions or comments or items for discussion, we can do that. Just wanna add, remember that the interim goals are put in place to support the major goals, so that's what you're looking at under, that's what the interim goals are for the public, for school board members, just a reminder. That's how the reminder. Take another 2 minutes. Okay, we're gonna call us back in order to take accurate notes that reflect any questions or concerns the board might have. I think we should go goal by goal. And if there are questions or comments, discussion points, we can talk about it during that time. So why don't we, and also Dr. Dillon was kind enough to give us like some direction about what would be useful. She did say, please review each goal and determine if additional changes to the goal are recommended based on community feedback and board input. And if so, what are the changes that need to be made so we can move forward? Okay. So the first goal that we have is grade 3 literacy, early childhood literacy. The percent of grade 3 students who score proficient on the RICAS daily assessment will increase from 24% in May 2025 to 50% in May 2030. This data is monitored quarterly using iReady reading proficiency and growth data. And then right under that, proposed ways to measure interim SMART measures will target the following areas ending in May of 2030. K-2 early literacy mastery on iReady, K-2 iReady diagnostic growth, grade 3 literacy mastery on iReady, grade 3 iReady diagnostic growth, and grade 3 RICAS proficiency. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns about goal 1 or the draft interim measures that they put in place?
I guess the only question I have when I read this is, what are the differences And like what is iReady measuring versus RICAS in this situation?
And, for clarification, we are taking down questions and we're gonna submit them to Dr. Jones
Okay.
and her team. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight, so we will collect them and send them over as a group. Secretary Fox, do you have that question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jenny. Any other questions, comments, concerns regarding goal one?
Just have a quick question too. So why do we have to wait for another 5 years for the district to provide for 12% increases?
You say that one more time, a little louder?
Why should we wait for another 5 years for us to have 50% workers and then as assistant? Like why do we need for the 5 years?
So we haven't fleshed out the interim measures yet, but so the goal is that those interim measures, there will be progression throughout the 5 years. I think that was a little bit of a confusion that we had also with the council. We had originally thought about them as 1-year interim goals, and then AJ had suggested they should be 3-year interim goals, which make the percentages different. So that's still, I think, a work in progress about the progression through 2030 to get to the overall goal.
And based on what I've heard from Dr. Dillon, thank you for that, what I've heard from Dr. Dillon is the sort of like baseline 24%, and then the progression up to 50% is based on where students are now, what resources are available, and what the district thinks is realistic in terms of progression within a 5-year time span.
This might just be like a little, I don't even know what to call it. Not a particularly major question, but for the interim SMART goals, it talks about the first 4 are linked to iReady, but the 5th goal is actually RICAS proficiency, but that's actually the final goal as well, right? So I guess, okay, I think I've answered my own question. Okay. Because you would have to check that on an interim basis. Okay, never mind.
Oh yeah, iReady was more intro, right?
Right. But RICAS would also be an interim measure in advance of the
final goal.
Yeah, perfect, okay. Answer my own question. If I waited a minute, I wouldn't have raised it.
Well, now you help answer my question a little bit.
Are there any other questions related to goal 1? No? Are we okay to move? Oh,
And this might be like for kind of all of them. Is the interim not where there's some type of measurement based on different demographics? Like I said before, like if you look at the data of students who have been in the system from the beginning to the end, it's a different measurement of if you're looking at someone who like maybe just came into the country and has a totally different baseline, right? And I think you have to be very particular to not punish teachers for just the change in enrollment or try to like create a perception of how well a school is doing based on maybe immigration increases and different populations have different baselines. But maybe that's more appropriate in the outputs. I'm not sure.
Would that also, I'm sorry, would that also have been accounted for in sort of what's realistic?
Yeah, and I think your guardrail number 4 refers to students furthest from educational justice, and that's where we really looked at the gaps, the achievement gaps for different subpopulations. So I think we get to that a little bit as a guardrail.
Awesome. Yeah, because I know there's a huge debate about if you're focusing on students who are one step away from proficiency, and it's easier to move those students up rather than focusing on students who need the most help, but it might not statistically be the most sexy result, right? And I think sometimes our measurements can, lead us into the latter, right? Focusing on the students that are the easiest to move rather than the students who need the most support.
And there's also some exceptions from RIDE with testing, like students who are new to the country don't have to test within the first year.
Yeah.
And things like that, so there are some additional controls.
Yeah.
For some of those populations.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, we're gonna move on to goal 2. So goal 2, grade 4 math readiness. The percentage of grade 4 students who score proficient on the RICAS math assessment will increase from 23.6% in May 2025 to 36% in May 2030. Proposed ways to measure interim smart measures will target the following areas ending in May of 2030. K3 math mastery on iReady, K3 iReady diagnostic group. Okay, I'm trying to make sure I'm looking at this correctly. Grade 4 math mastery on iReady, bless you. Grade 4 iReady diagnostic group and grade 4 RICAS proficiency. Any questions, concerns, discussion related to goal 2? And again, for folks watching or just coming to this space, we are, as a board, RIDE, PGSD, we worked together back in October to craft these goals, right? Based on the community feedback that we got during community listening sessions. Dr. Dillon took this information and is now creating interim goals to help move us from baseline to the goal in 2030. And we're just making sure as a team we feel comfortable with those interim goals and vetting them so that way we can move towards adoption in January. Any questions related to goal 2? Comments, concerns? Okay, we're gonna move on to goal 3, grade 8 literacy middle school readiness. The percent of grade 8 students who score proficient on the RICAS ELA assessment will increase from 15.9% in May 2025 to 25% in May 2030. Proposed ways to measure interim smart measures will target the following areas ending in May of 2030. Grade 7 students mastery in core literacy on iReady, grade 8 iReady diagnostic growth on iReady, grade 8 mastery on iReady, and grade 8 RICAS ELA proficiency. Any questions, comments, discussions around goal 3 or any of those interim draft goals?
Is there any, did y'all ever think, and I don't know if this is maybe this is a bad question, but is there any interim goals that can measure the impact that our K-8 model will have that would fit in this? I know that K-8 strategy is a large role in our middle school strategy, and a lot of parents had some interesting input in our focus group that we had with Dexter. And they said that they're looking forward to the K-8 model because of the continuity of the PTOs going from elementary school to middle school, gives them more time together, and that cohesion and how that could be helpful for PTOs having strength in their body. And then one of the questions they asked was, what is the measurement of success for that new model? And if there was a place to include, if there was an appropriate place to include that, a school building committee member would love to see that included.
Any other comments related to goal 3? We may find that some of our questions were answered while looking at goal 1, so I feel like there were questions that were related to structure. And so I can see why there might not be as many as we keep going. But to honor the process, let's keep going. We're going to move to goal 4, graduates with industry credential. The percentage of students graduating with at least one approved industry credential will increase from 14.9% in June 2025 to 25% in June 2030. Proposed ways to measure interim smart measures will target the following areas ending in May of 2030. CTE enrollment and completion, industry assessment attempt rate, and workforce credential attainment. So this one is a little different structurally compared to the other ones, so I wonder if there's any new questions coming up for people as we look at goal 4.
I think I have a question or is this goal is gonna go throughout the whole, like whole high school will be having this opportunity? All right, because I know right now, certain high school like DCTA only have CTA. Like, I'm sure.
Most of our high schools do. I think classical is going does not, but they do have a planned CTE program for next year. So students want access to that. Yeah, by the time this goal is starting to be measured by the school board, every school will have opportunities for CTE should the students want to engage in those.
Okay, thank you.
I know Ride also has some really strong goals around CTE as well, so I think there'll be a lot of support at the Department of Education for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
What is industry assessment attempt rate?
Follow question.
There's for each program that has an industry credential, there's an assessment that goes with it. And so in order to get that industry credentialing to pass the sequence of courses that are associated with that, as well as the assessment.
I do wonder about, and I'm not sure how hard this would be to collect, but I do wonder about like students who go into the actual
I
job.
agree.
Yeah, like I feel like that's really important to know.
I was thinking that,
Yeah.
like, is it appropriate because it is a different goal kind of, but I think that if it takes time and it's, hard work, I think it's worth creating a system to track that because, to be honest, at the workforce board, I'm like, most of the times I'm like, the main thing we should be looking at is that students, that they get a job and they keep a job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if it's not a job, like continued education at like a career in tech, like New England Tech or something, or you went into the fire academy, or like I'm just wondering, like what's the real world implication and like how are we holding ourselves accountable to make sure students continue down that path? I think these are really like 3 really important ways to do that. I do sort of feel like that might be one that we should consider. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns regarding goal 4, mainly the interim goals that are being proposed? Okay, let's move on to the last one. This one we really want to pay attention to. It's definitely still being worked out. I do want to highlight during our community listening sessions, we heard loud and clear from community information that relates to all 5 of these goals. That's why we have them. And we definitely heard from folks like social emotional learning, like being like a core component that needs to be incorporated into what students should know and be able to do. I think like as a team, like we all sort of struggled during our like goals creation process to figure out how to make it work, right? Because we all value that, or like how do we measure it? How do we do that? And so I really appreciate that the district came up with this like way of doing this through the Portrait of a Graduate rubric. But there's still, I know, some tweaking here that needs to be done. And so I think if anyone has any questions or concerns, then definitely, from what I'm hearing from the district, very welcome because it's going to help that process along here. So I'll read it out. So goal 5, civic and global competence to enhance social emotional learning. The percentage of students who graduate demonstrating proficiency on the Portrait of a Graduate civic and global engagement rubric will increase from 0% in 2024 to 70% in 2030. Asterisk, the goals and competencies will be aligned to the following CASEL competencies. CASEL alignment ensures universal access to instruction that requires the following areas: self-awareness, reflecting on perspectives and civic identity; social awareness, understanding community needs, cultures, and contexts; relationship skills and communication; collaborative problem solving on real issues; and responsible decision-making, analyzing issues, and taking informed civic action. And one more. Next page, self-management, sustaining engagement over time, and reflecting on outputs.
This one has me torn because I love civics, and this looks like every component of social emotional learning that I think is like important. But I also am like, is there more? Yeah, I'm not sure if there's like, if this is, if the goal was more focused on social emotional learning, would it be more focused? Would it yield better outcomes? But I also see how civics is a great vehicle to educate on these other components as well, right?
Yeah, we had this discussion recently where we're like, I think portrait of a graduate, which has not been rolled out yet, right? That's why it's at 0%. It's not that this stuff isn't happening, it's just this rubric isn't like in effect yet. But I think I don't want to misquote her, but I think we were reckoning with that. It's like in some ways, this goal 5 might be trying to do two things at once, like trying to hold both the civics and global competency, and then honoring that like need that we're hearing from community to work on social emotional development. And so I think that's where the stickiness comes of like, do we need to sort of like focus on one? Can we focus on both? And if so, how do we do that in a way where we can measure it and actually put the resources towards both? Yeah.
Just for context, so the board has this, this is my understanding, I could be wrong, so correct me if I don't have this quite right. I think the portrait of a graduate is like near completed in terms of a sort of fairly polished draft. It got in front of the commissioner this week. She's given her sort of final feedback. My expectation would be that Paula and the superintendent would be available to bring that to the board for a formal sort of community dialogue and presentation when the board leadership feels like it's ready in time to put that on the agenda. My understanding of it is that it's built around a number of different pillars. I don't remember them all. Like academic proficiency is one, civic and global engagement is another. And under each one of those things is a sort of rubric. Here are the things that we should expect that students graduate PPSD ready and able to do. And I think given the nature of the board's conversation at the retreat in October and November, Paula felt like that was the one that was most connected. It is going to take, as anyone who's worked in schools knows, it takes like a long time to get these systems up and running, to get the rubrics up and running, to get everyone trained, to make sure that like biases as much as possible seep out of the system, so that particularly when we're using like qualitative rubric and evaluating students' performance, it's done based on evidence and data, not on pupils or teachers, educators' bias. That is a natural part of the process that we have to really try to sort of sublimate. So just naming that, I think it's not going to be as straightforward as some of the other goals.
Any questions, concerns, even ideas? I mean, anything that's coming up for you all related to Goal 5?
I think it makes sense to make this, like to make the civics somehow the core of this, right? But civics can be taught in different ways. So there's a really old book from like the 1960s called Voice of Quality, and it basically outlines the professors from Harvard who studied like the way civics is taught differently in poorer areas, in urban areas, as opposed to the way that it's taught in wealthier areas and more suburban areas, right? And that civics by itself is not the basic content is not pre-established, right? And how you approach that content, even if we said like, okay, you should be able to name the capital, you should be able to name, 5 countries in Africa. You should be able to name the capitals of every state or whatever, even if we had an agreed upon content, the approach to that content is not necessarily a foregone conclusion, right? So I think if we were to say, my idea would be if we could take like a sort of core civics curriculum plus like some social justice elements or some if we're not going to call it social justice, call it something like empathic analysis or whatever you want to call it, a critical lens to traditional sort of ways that civics was approached. I think those two things together would get us pretty far in the direction that I think community is talking about, right? Like, that it's not just civics based on like real memorization of like the three branches of government or whatever. You should know all that, right? But then you should also know that that politics is also it's also contentious, right? And that there's that there are inherent problems that arise because people are blind to the lives of others and the lived experience of others. So I think that like it's not like a great concrete suggestion or anything, but I think that like if we could think in those terms, like civics plus,
Yeah.
and I think that that's actually how civics should be taught, right?
Yeah.
Like,
You make me think like civics and moral leadership, right? So like leadership is mobilizing people, right? Moral leadership is mobilizing people around social justice causes, right? So that's what I think of as like what you're saying is civics and moral leadership, right? Like you have a civic responsibility, but to be a moral leader in the community and help with that need and support, right?
yeah, or I mean, there's probably a variety of ways of approaching that, but there's sort of, something like that, or even civics and ethics, or civics and, civics plus an additional sort of, just to make sure that we're orienting that in a way that promotes personal development, rather than just kind of,
And how do you actually participate in these systems?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How do you participate in these systems, trying to honor what our vision is for students?
Right.
It's leaded by empathy and justice, and like
Yeah.
not to just memorize, but to participate in civics in a way that's empathetic and collaborative and self-aware, interculturally engaged, right? Of all of those things that we learn in preschool and then forget as we get older. Yeah.
well, it's traditional civics a lot of times talks about who's at the table.
Yeah.
And I think what the piece we need to add is also be attentive to who is not at the table. So that's the thing.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments, concerns related to goal 5? Secretary Fox, you feel like you have all those questions and thoughts down? Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, now to move to the one that might have us here till 10 o'clock. No, so I'm kidding. And I kind of jumped the gun when I was talking earlier, so I just want to get into this. We'll see where it goes. Guardrails, right? So when we went out into the community for a second time with our draft goals and guardrails, we opened up our past November board meetings of public comment. We spoke with groups like DWAC and Dr. Olney's Equity Advisory Council. The CAP was given materials that they responded to without us being there. And it had been like, as a board, like really thinking about the goals and guardrails, right? And being open to feedback from the community. There was a couple of key things that came out of that feedback process. One was what we just discussed, which was goal 5, is like how do we make it more social emotional forward? Because community, the folks we talked to weren't really getting that so much. And so we just discussed if we can possibly do that. The other 2 big pieces of feedback were related to the guardrails. So the first one was that folks had questions about why guardrails were framed in the quote unquote negative. The Council of Great City Schools makes a really great case that they're not negative, but they are framed in a negative. And community was like, what's up with that? Like, why are they framed that way? I think what we heard is that it feels that the guardrails are like restrictive and that they signal division between the board and the superintendent, and they just don't feel inspiring. We've been generously coached by the Council of Great City Schools and understand where they would advocate that there's a lot of autonomy in having guardrails. And I do want to read something that I think clarifies, at least AJ clarified for me yesterday. about the difference between a guardrail and a directive. And then we're gonna have a discussion because what you have in front of you is a proposal to maybe flip the guardrails, or to keep them as they were. And it's up to us. We can decide what we wanted to. And then bring that to our discussion on the 17th and then formally adopt in January. But from the Council of Great City Schools, learning the Council of Great City Schools teaches that guardrails are high-level commitments that set clear boundaries around what the superintendent and district must not allow to happen while pursuing the board's student outcome goals. They protect student experience, equity, and community values without prescribing how the work must be done. In contrast, directives are operational instructions that tell the superintendent how to run the district, such as specifying programs, trainings, or procedures, which pulls the board into management rather than governance. Council of Great City Schools emphasizes that effective boards avoid directives and instead adopt a small number of meaningful guardrails that define the conditions under which goals must be achieved, allowing the superintendent to design and lead the strategies while the board monitors progress. Does anybody remember the taxi video that AJ had sent us as like an analogy? I didn't remember it either until he reminded me yesterday.
Telling us about
Yes.
it, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Does anyone other than me wanna?
The Uber driver.
The Uber driver, yeah. Did I say taxi? What year is it? What are we talking about? Uber. So basically, he says that after working an 8-hour day, he needs to like get home, and he calls an Uber. But upon his own research, he realized that a specific highway is like really clogged up. So he tells the Uber driver, "I need you to get me here." And his only instruction is just don't take that highway, right? And then AJ brought us through this sort of like mind exercise of like, what's the benefit of me telling the Uber driver not to go down that highway? What does that allow the Uber driver to do?
Adjust with traffic as the other lanes open up.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Find ways to go around and not
Mm-hmm.
go to the highway.
Yep. What position does it put the Uber driver in?
Empower.
It empowers them, right? It empowers them to be able to decide, to have autonomy. Because when it comes to driving cars, AJ would say, who's the expert? The person in the back seat, the person driving, right? I think I'm the expert in the back seat. Maybe that's why nobody wants to drive with me, and maybe that's why I like directives. But yes, exactly. So it's Uber driver, who's the expert? They know where to go. They're just taking that one precaution, which is don't take this highway. So it gives them a lot of autonomy. That's the analogy that AJ uses to talk about why guardrails are they're actually less restrictive than directives. With that said, community has still been like, but yeah, and still, those thou shall not statements sound restrictive. I think we've heard that not only from community, but I think we've discussed that at certain points, right? And so, again, it's totally up to our board what we want to do. We can stick with the thou shall not statements that we originally came up with, or we could like remix them and flip them. So I just wanted to go through and let's just have a discussion. We don't need to decide today. We can just discuss and like think about it and continue talking.
Could I offer a third possibility?
Please.
So I love the remix, but I also appreciate the logic of having the negative, don't do this. Because part of this is to provide guardrails for the superintendent, and if we are expected in the future to have, if we're unhappy about something that's being done, and we're, we can, if we have to say, don't do this, we can then go and say, look, you're doing this, and we feel like you're violating this guardrail, and we can have discussion around that. That's clearer and less sort of, nebulous, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate both, and I think that actually my suggestion would be that we use both, so that we take the highlighted statements and we set that up as like the preamble. Students attending schools identified as et cetera, will be, staff and administrators. Therefore, the superintendent will not allow teachers, staff, and administrators not meeting performance standards to serve in schools identified as CSI or redesign. Just a little, therefore, or,
Yep. So that would be a hybrid.
as such or whatever, yeah,
Mhm.
like a hybrid.
Yeah, we actually heard that from somebody in community. I won't say their name, but like one of the community members was like, "Why don't you just take both?" And we were like,
Yeah, I think,
"Maybe."
and I was even thinking that, like, we could pass the guardrails as they are and then just use that for communication purposes,
Mhm.
right? And add the therefore, right, and then, clarify, because I agree, I think, when I read these guardrails, it's like, when my mom's like, boy, you bet not, right? And it's like, you don't feel great about it, and like, my friends might come over and say, your mom's strict, right? But I'm like, but there's no girls over with blankets out, there's, the door stays open, like, these are the rules I don't break.
Yes.
Right, I'll go to the line with these, but these are the rules I don't break. And, it doesn't always feel good, but it's like, sometimes that's necessary, right?
Yeah.
I,
Reggie?
I think that we should keep the garden the way it is. And also I'm also thinking about the Steve idea where we can just mix it up.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have questions, suggestions, concerns? I do want to highlight, there is one,
The first one changed a little bit.
yes, that's the
I
one.
like that
Yeah.
too, because I kind of feel a certain way about it. I think like I'm hard on, I think the question about the measurement stuff was a good point that they made, and I see it says educator effectiveness readings. Is that the state measurement, the typical measurement that we currently use?
It's the educator evaluation, yeah, it's based on the state, model.
Yeah, so I think it's difficult because
Which part are you referring to, Chairman Jones? You're looking at
the
the intro.
proposed interim smart measures, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think and so this is hard because for me, it's like the teachers that I think I am most concerned about is the ones who are tapped out and don't want to, make progress, right? And it's hard to like determine that. That's a very like ambiguous thing, right? But if a teacher is like committed to the job and she needs support, I think that we should be supporting them, she or he, right? So I like the way you reframed those. I would love to actually see it reframed in a way that's more supportive rather than, indict any teacher who doesn't meet these performance standards, right?
One of the pieces of feedback that we heard was that guardrail one seemed to, check me if I'm wrong, Secretary
Ambiguous.
Fox. It was ambiguous, but it was that it felt that the vision statement has a systemic lens.
Yeah.
Right? Had a systemic lens like that. It's wanting young people to not only be good for themselves but others, right? And to like have social justice and empowerment as like a core of their being, right? But then guardrail one, I think to some community members who came out, felt that transformation was only sort of placed at the teacher level, and that it wasn't holding, the system accountable, right? And so I think that's the main change I wanted to raise, is that this is sort of rewritten to not only focus on teachers, but it also says staff and administrators to try to encompass the sort of systemic spirit of like student outcomes.
And I think even if we keep the original phrasing of it, we should substitute teacher, staff, and administrators
Yeah.
instead of, I think that sounds.
I have a question on the educator effectiveness rating. Does this encompass also admin? Lisa, do they take that same assessment? Okay, just
It
me.
might be a different assessment, but there's an assessment.
Should that be an interim goal board? I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
I would even argue that the superintendent should not allow, I would add something about the district will support them and, while after receiving support, then they, should not be allowed to continue to be in the CSI school, right? Like I think adding in that kind of conditional after receiving, support, right, will not be allowed to be, it still doesn't meet the standards, right, it does not, will not be allowed to stay in schools. That's the modification I'm making.
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts, feedback, suggestions related to either, I know we're kind of looking at two different things here that are intertwined. We have like the guardrails, framed as guardrails. We have the highlighted directives, and then we have the interim guardrails. Are there any?
Can I just offer just some thoughts for the board, just based on like my hearing of the community feedback on this? I think when we did this training on January 31st and February 1st, the feedback we're hearing from the community was like my initial reaction to. I think to your point, we have this discussion as like we just felt like everything was like focused on what the superintendent would not do. It just feels super awkward. I think we should, as a team, get super precise and clear about like what the purpose of the guardrails are, and be super tight on that, so that we can be sort of better bring the community along about why this is important and framed in this way. I also think as part of the process, my understanding, although I'm not super expert on this, is that at some point during the process, the board will select and decide on guardrails for their own practice and decision making. And so I think it's important that the community understand that this isn't just about, so that it doesn't feel like a division between the board and the superintendent. We're just trying to provide the direction. We're also going to do that same thing for ourselves. I think in the community meeting that I was at where this came up, I think there was just some confusion about the sort of process and like, and I think we probably could have been tighter as a team, and maybe we just need to get that clarity from AJ. But if we can paint that portrait that this isn't just about the superintendent having parameters or sort of, or I guess maybe flexibility, but also in terms of their own practice.
Yeah, I'd also like vote to rearrange these. I think, the one at number 1 can be last, and I would love to see like either number 2, like community input, right, or number 4 being, one of the first ones, right?
Yeah, number 4.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about. I didn't really think about order and what that's conveying. Like,
Because it is the same thing in practice, right? But I think in, from a community perspective, it may be received a little differently, right? First thing, a teacher who's out here and advocating to read is educators, right? The first thing they read is community membership. Most schools need to be impacted by these changes should happen, right?
Yeah.
I do think for
Yeah.
actually had a I know we did discuss this a little bit in our last meeting, and we heard over and over again at the meetings, we heard transparency. And I know 2 was intended to sort of capture that, but I think that it's not maybe broad enough. So the way it's written currently, I just feel like it might be interpreted as the changes the community members most closely impacted by those changes. It sort of implies like localized, like if you're going to do something at a school, you talk about it with the people at that school, which is great. But I think it leaves a kind of, it doesn't. I think I would like to see it being more inclusive of everything that PPSD does. So I would maybe ask if we could add a little bit on the end. So basically, the superintendent shall not implement significant changes without first engaging community members most closely impacted to those changes, and will promote transparency in PPSD operations or something like that. So
Yeah,
it's also, it's not just about what's happening at that particular school, but about the way the district is run. But we're just trying to be transparent about stuff.
I support that. And I'll also say that one of our first guardrails should probably be a kind of flipped version of that, right? Where we take some accountability for being that conduit to the community and to the district and being able to help that kind of work. I did a small focus group with some community members with Dexter on the school buildings committee, and the difference in how people joined that conversation, how they left that conversation. And it was kind of eye-opening, and then also the amount of those were 5-6 conversations I would have had to have for probably an hour each, and so it was also helpful for me right? And it wasn't much of a lift either. It was just adding people to an email and saying out of flash, right? So I think there's more work that we can definitely be doing in that sphere, and it makes me feel more comfortable with increasing that kind of accountability for creating that connection with the community.
Any other thoughts, comments, suggestions related to the guardrails, the directives, or the interim guardrails? The good news is we don't have to vote on anything today or in December. I'm just saying this so we all are on the same page. We are going to move towards adoption in January. I think we all can agree, both board and district alike, we need a little bit more time, right? To make sure that we're all in alignment, that the goals and the guardrails and the interim goals and guardrails are sound, and that we feel confident in being able to achieve what we set out. And more than anything, that represents what the communities that they want and we know we can actually deliver on. So,
For guardrail 3, I wanna ask everyone, do you feel, and it says that students, where students feel unsafe or unsupported physically, emotionally, culturally, do we feel these interim goals speak to those 3 kind of categories? Suspension rates, serious incident rates, panorama survey, which I believe has questions about culture and things like that. If that is the case, then okay, I'm feeling, but just wanted to call attention to the board. Do we feel like these 3 things support those 3 kind of categories?
I would love to see something regarding like restorative justice, right? Like if you this is just a loose example, and I'm not as good to know if this example is good, but if you break a window, right, you should have to clean it up, and like your punishment should be connected to restoring some of the harm that you caused in the community. There should be a lesson about pouring into the community, right, instead of harming the community. So I think that, not sure if that fits as an interim goal, but even if we just change guardrail 3 and add the words restorative justice in it, I think that would be satisfactory for me.
I'm not. Yeah, so I'm not really sure about how I feel about this. So the panorama. So just refresh my memory. If I remember correctly, there's no student outcome focus for guardrails. That's where we get to talk about it, right? So there's no certified. But I think a sort of parallel concern, when we did the initial training, we talked about why suspension rates were not a measure of student outcomes, because they were driven by the adults in the situation, not by the students in the situation. I think I'm very comfortable with like the panorama survey in school safety, which I assume the students are filling that out, right? So we're getting
Families.
feedback and family feedback about do they feel safe, et cetera. Serious incident rates is probably good, but suspension rates, I'm not sure that I get that, because I feel like we might have some administrators who are very quick to suspend, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was an unsafe environment. And then you might have other administrators who may be slower to suspend, or there just aren't as many suspensions happening, but that doesn't mean that there aren't unsafe or dangerous things happening. You know what I mean? So I feel
What
like
if that were to
that's
say like disproportionate suspension?
That's the word.
So like
I'm
if you
looking
like were to examine a school that disproportionately is suspending Black students,
right.
Yeah,
that's a sign of a learning environment that's
Okay.
unsafe and
I like
unsupported.
that.
I think that's what she's trying to get at.
Okay, so maybe if we could include the word disproportionate in
yeah.
there, that might be,
Three disparities.
yeah.
Or disparities.
Because the other 2 are very clearly related to observable
Yeah,
incidents of things being unsafe, whereas suspension rates is not, could be capturing all kinds of
yeah.
stuff.
There's a situation.
So, but that's not why it's there. It's there because the suspension rate itself could actually be a sign
When you dig into
of a gotcha. Okay.
One data point you might think about, because it's supposed to be tracked anyway, is the bullying data. That more than suspension would capture interactions among students and efforts to restore relationships. That's at least according to the law. We're supposed to be deciding if it's truly bullying and then engaging in all these practices. If you do find it to be bullying, to remedy the situation. So there's probably there is and should be a tracking mechanism in each school. They're supposed to report their data every 6 months to the Department of Ed and And so that's another way of doing it as opposed to suspension, which, as you said, could be a teacher's interaction with a student that may or may not have anything to do with.
But it could also be a sign that the students aren't being properly supported if they're just being suspended all the time, if it's a disproportionate to certain
Yeah, and
groups.
that RIDE tracks all of that, and every school district is reporting that data every single day, and there should be no out-of-school suspensions at all unless the student is a demonstrable threat, and unless the student has been properly supported and those efforts have failed. Most school districts, and I don't know if what's happening in PPSD, still do an out-of-school suspension when they are not supposed to be, but it is something you can look at to see how, because that data is there and it's already been reported to RIDE, and why they suspended and what the student did and whether it was harassment or something more serious. And it's all like available, and it should be telling you something about what's going on in the school. The only thought is to add bullying, because that's at least tracked. It's theoretically tracked separately. And so.
It makes me think about that policy, how we talk about discrimination, because I know we kind of agree that
Yes.
bullying and discrimination are different. And do we feel like adding the bullying kind of data and discrimination report, like do we, or is that like, we can have 3 to 5 incidents?
The non-discrimination data is, I mean, in a day-to-day sense, you're gonna have like, you're gonna have a handful of Title IX allegations, not that many, because most incidents don't rise to that level. Incidents of real race-based behavior are gonna be fewer, and your documentation is not gonna be as much there, but what's really robust is your disciplinary data, which, by the way, if you look at the coding that RIDE has implemented, includes things like bullying and race and gender. It's not as precise as the statutes, but it's there to kind of give you a feel for it. So my question about these guardrails in a broader sense is how you imagine they would overlap or support some of the policy work that you're going to be doing. And it's a little bit, it's a little bit suggested by this particular one about safety, because it does link to all the non-discrimination, anti-bullying stuff that we're talking about elevating to legally mandated policies, but they can work very closely together. I think it's good. I mean, the guardrails can, however you frame them, restrictively or however negatively or positively, with or without preambles, they should be linking to at least some of the bigger policy governance work that you're contemplating, re-scripting. So.
I agree. I'm a part of this city committee for violence reduction, and we actually had a discussion about RIDE's bullying school safety policy, and I have it on my desk, and I'm supposed to review it, but I think that definitely that sounds like it's another helpful metric to add.
Any feelings about Carmen's? this is where Corey, how you kind of brought up, how we'll be looking at, I'm gonna say this one,
Disaggregated data.
disaggregated data, so it speaks to differently abled, economically disadvantaged, and multilingual learners. I know we got a lot of feedback from community about multilingual learning, and this is where that guardrail kind of protects those demographics of students. Yeah, just take a quick look at it and see if there's a guardrail for, in the interim, guardrail supported. This. It was sent. We did elevate, just from previous board, conversations, juvenile justice and foster care youth. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, the data is so kind of small, there's not enough to report on, but Angel made a good point that those youth usually are intersecting with these demographic, students.
The hardest thing about guardrail 4 is that when you look at the other interim goals, so the other interim measures for the other guardrails, they're very focused on the administrators, the staff, right? Even like our conversation about suspension rates. And if you're tracking the disparity, you're really tracking how the staff are kind of interacting versus the other staff, right? And guardrail 4 very much is like very focused on the students, which I'm like, I don't know if that's bad, right? But not necessarily make it bad, right? But does it take, what is the accountability? I guess advanced course enrollment shows a level of accountability on the administrators, right? But how do you hold an administrator, how would we hold the superintendent accountable if these numbers don't necessarily go up, but maybe it's not a reflection of the actions of the superintendent as much as it is the other interim goals, other interim measures for the other guardrails, right? So I guess that's a lot of words to say, I'm not sure.
I think I see where you're going with that, so,
Maybe that's not bad, I don't know, maybe that's,
I think it forces us to be, I feel, you said something earlier that I agree with, related to the goals of like, how do we make sure the students who are most impacted by systems of oppression are considered in these, you know, like goals that we have here, and I do feel like this one, number 4, is sort of calling that out in some ways of like inclusive and almost regardless of like how everyone else does. Like we need to know that our MLL students are differently able students in foster care youth. I didn't think I saw the foster care youth in here. She's still working on that one. Like if everyone else is doing great, but they are suffering and not doing well, then we have a huge problem. And what we've heard from different presentations from the district, we know that when MLO students and other students who are a part of these groups thrive, like the whole district thrives. Education just gets better, right? And so I think, I guess that's a long way of me saying that maybe it's okay to have it be student focused because it's, I can't get the analogy right, but the all tides rise shifts in that, you know. I feel like that does that.
It goes over all the time.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
like
just,
my
I'm just like, I
favorite
just
thing.
see boats going up. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Something's rising.
Right.
Yeah.
That part. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where I was like, I don't know if it's right or wrong, right? I think that the key measurement of the superintendent is the advanced course enrollment, right? We know that students that, I believe, the studies say that students may be able to be in an advanced course, but it's likely to be, unequitable kind of decision making that leads to less students that may be able to be in those advanced courses to not be right. But yeah, and so maybe there's another guardrail and another interim measure that can also help us kind of gauge the superintendent's performance in that work, right? The same way that advanced course enrollment does. And maybe that is the best one because advanced course enrollment is reflecting everything from school design and populations in schools all the way to the strategy to, you know, and put kids in certain classes, right? Maybe something around like remedial classes, right? Like like how many students are enrolled in classes, you know, where they're trying to play catch up.
Is there such an animal?
I just think the secondary schools regs would make that hard because you're really limited on riders requiring foundation in most of those
Yeah.
courses. So I would just need to do some more thinking with my folks who run the high schools teams at RIDE just to understand how we might measure that. I can get back to the superintendent.
Thank you.
Corey, I think also like 4.1 and 4.2, although they show student kind of ability, it does hold the superintendent educators accountable because they have to help them learn to see that growth.
Right.
In a, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not in such a direct way, but.
Absolutely. I think this one might feel a little different too, because I think guardrails 1 through 3, the sort of like the interim guardrails or like sort of outcomes of that are like almost like negative in a way. Like for instance, like suspension rates, right? Like it's not really a thing we want to see go up, right? Where I feel like 4 is actually talking about the
Something we
growth.
want to see increase, right?
Yeah,
it
so
almost
it's
feels
just like a
it
brain
should be
flip
in the
kind of.
goals, yeah.
Yeah. I also remember it's coming to me very slowly, but Dr. Dillon did say yesterday that I think that Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, that she didn't include foster care youth because they actually were outperforming.
They're, performing better than the subgroups, so there's not as big of a gap.
Yeah.
When we establish it.
Foster
Foster care.
Foster care youth. Yeah. Okay. So with that said, I just want to make sure that we have like the notes around some big ticket items that we need to focus on. So are we saying that directionally, we're not voting now, but just directionally, we like having both directives and guardrails. And so we would be moving towards having both of those be adopted, or I heard Corey, you say maybe one more for like communication purposes. And then I think I heard Steve, you say maybe actually combining them. And so I'm just wondering, did I hear that correctly from both of you?
Yeah, I was just thinking, just so we are like exactly as, you know, the kind of framework of the Council for Great City Schools, but then also I don't think anything forbids us from communicating that differently. And, you know, just having the kind of combination therefore, right?
For that. Steve, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably, you know, we could do that. I mean, I don't know, you'd have to ask the Council of Great City Schools, but I don't know that they would
Because
really like lose their minds over having like a preamble statement. You know what I mean? Like, this is but the remix bit would just be, this is our intent.
yeah,
And in order to get towards this, this is the rule that we're laying. The actual part that if we were ever to have a difficult conversation with the superintendent, it would be based on the thou shalt not. You know what I mean? This is where you cross, this is the thing that you did that you weren't supposed to do. This specific thing, and that's the specific thing that we want to talk to, whereas the remix bit would be sort of a general statement of intent. Like, this is what we hope to accomplish, but really the rule, you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
so,
We can talk with them about that. AJ said that ultimately you all will have to decide. He gave very strong suggestion for us to stick with guardrails. We did not talk to him about a hybrid.
Yeah, that was
Also, we
not-
can, yeah, we can.
or just as like, I would say it is like a preamble, whereas we want to do this, we tell the superintendent, you know what I mean? Or,
Not to.
Yeah.
yeah, not to do that.
One sort of practical thought about this is that, one of your biggest jobs is going to be to evaluate the superintendent. And while it sounds like we are, while the tone may be unpleasant, the reality is that your job is gonna be to hold the superintendent accountable, and part of what I see all of this council training do is giving you, with the community input, the opportunity to create specific mandates and expectations for the superintendent and to hold the superintendent accountable. If I were the superintendent, I would want the mandates to be as clear and precise as possible, because that is the thing that would enable me to have notice of what I need to do to satisfy you. So in a long-winded way, what I'm suggesting, a little bit on the AJ side of it, is that making explicit that it is the superintendent, and by that you mean the superintendent and the staff that support the superintendent, making explicit what you expect of the superintendent, and even thinking about it as potentially a part of the evaluation instrument that you will eventually be using, is perhaps better for both parties, because then the expectations are really clear. So the superintendent knows, I'm not gonna implement big changes. And of course you can debate what is a big change and what isn't, but let's say it's something obvious, like, I don't know, consolidating schools or changing curriculum, without first engaging the community. That's really clear to the superintendent as much as it can be, that he has certain options to do certain things, but that's like your bottom line. Whereas the more warm and supported sounding language is a little bit more vague. And if I'm looking at an evaluation an evaluation instrument in the future, you may be better off being more clear and more explicit with the superintendent about what the expectations are, than to sort of turn it into, I noticed you did the passive voice, students shall be, instead of the superintendent shall. And that sort of removes accountability a little bit, it diffuses it, like, well, what does that mean? Who's in charge? And the superintendent's in charge. I mean, what you're really doing is creating, through this student outcomes governance, like a hyper evaluation instrument. That's the way it's like, it is like, hard. This is like real work. We want these accomplishments. And in doing that, you may not do X, Y, and Z. And I think it's helpful to be really clear. So that's just my sort of semi thought about the future. When you put together a document that you're gonna say, this is what we want. It's like a contract. It is a contract.
But I think that can be accomplished whether we keep the guardrails, thou shalt not statements, or if we put a preamble in front of it and say, if this being the case, the superintendent shall not, it still makes it clear that at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is that you may be putting into your evaluation instrument and into your contract that the superintendent is responsible for giving effect to the goals and guardrails.
Right.
Yeah. And that's gonna be like, oh, okay, that's like, paragraph 1.
Right, that makes sense.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree with Sarah, and I think these are value expressions, right? So these are the things you wanna be explicitly clear about as your values, that in accomplishing your goals or seeking to accomplish your goals, you're not going to violate these values. So I really like the way, really, that Steve suggested that it be captured, which is, if we are gonna frame it in positive, also to have the, therefore, we shall not, I think that provides the explicit instruction rather than having some ambiguity because we're reframing it. I like the way that was expressed, and I thought that was a good suggestion.
Thank you so much. Can I say something?
Yes.
Absolutely. I've been thinking about
guardrail free, and the thing that has me concerned with it is I worry, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe it's just me, I worry that it's not gonna be used, I wanted to make sure it's used to protect the students and not police them. So I feel like the goal of it is to make sure that, there's trainings and the adults are using best practices and you have PDs for it and they're learning how to interact with the kids and there's restorative justice. But I worry that it can be used as a tool to increase police activity in the school. So that's,
Aubrey, I really love the idea of adding an interim about specific PDs that maybe need to happen.
I hear you though, like honestly, I didn't think about it like that. Like there is a way to read this if you have a different worldview.
Yeah.
Different
Right.
worldview that says, oh, there a young person is being harmful, we must remove them to
Okay,
like
can I think of an example?
yeah, like there's a way to read this that is like, oh, we remove threats. And then we place kids in bubbles. And
right, or we just increase police in schools and that will solve the problem. Look at this
Yeah.
statistic, let's do this.
You just came in with a 3-pointer, Aubrey, jeez. Thank you for not letting us go forward without considering that.
No, that's definitely why I wanted to see like restorative justice in that writing.
Or
Also-
PC on it.
Yeah. I also think that like when we get into the policy and making really clear, clean policy that connects to that guardrail, right, is gonna be really important as well.
I think that's also where having the kind of like the preamble, because I think your remix of it actually does kind of capture more, that's less
Yeah.
open to interpretation. You know what I mean? That like this is something that should be designed into the environment. That everybody, it's not about locking up troublemakers or you know what I mean? Like it's about
I do think the value of the remix is that it centers the values versus the rule.
right.
I understand why the rules are important,
Right.
but I think values are just as important, or else the rules will override everything. You know,
I'd be interested to hear what Council of Great City Schools has to say
Yeah.
about it.
let's take this up with HSCD and I'll bring this back for more discussion. So, are we okay with closing this part?
Yeah.
This, okay.
I just want to make a quick comment on the process. I heard you say, President, that you were hoping to get this done by January. My sense is the PDSD team is willing to roll up their sleeves to try to make that happen. I think what would best position the PDSD team, just to be as like honest or transparent as possible, is that if at the December 17th meeting, if the board could take action on the final goals and interim guardrails and make sure that feedback from AJ has happened, that is going to position the PPSD team then from the 17th to turn over the interim goals. I think you can imagine it's impossible if this is constantly a moving target, things are constantly being reshaped. It's really hard for the superintendent's team to then keep up with and keep changing and amending potential interim goals. It's going to be nearly impossible if it isn't like stake in the ground, final decision on the 17th for the team to have something ready in January, just to be like as honest as possible. And so just naming, like I just think that would be great.
Yeah, thank you for that, yes.
I actually had meant to ask in relation to that, because I haven't really done communication about like the actual feedback that we've gotten since our last meeting. It seemed like at the last meeting, there has been pushback and was concerned about the guardrails, but like really nobody seemed to have any problem with the goals. Like it seems like something everybody's been all right with so far. Is that still the case? Have we gotten any
I have
feedback?
to look at the survey data, cause I know we got a couple more responses,
Yeah.
but yeah, as far as most of the data and feedback, was the goals are spot on. People had issues with the
With the
wording of the
guardrails.
guardrail, and then guardrail number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because, I mean, we already kind of, based on the last meeting, told Dr. Dillon that we didn't expect the goals to be shifting, but if we could give a firm answer on that.
Yeah.
I just think even in the discussion today, what Nick says as a listener, I'm like, I don't think we've nailed that down yet. There's like different variations of things, and it's all good discussion. I'm not like judging that, but like I don't know that the team has what they need to sort of nail down the interim goals, and in just also saying that like I don't think that just happens in 24 hours, right? Like there's going to be a ton of feedback from AJ, and we just got to make some final decisions and help move it
Were you saying that the interim goals need to be nailed down or the goals?
forward. The goals and the interim measures, right? Because she can't, if Paula Dillon, who's drafting most of this on behalf of the superintendent, isn't clear on like what the interim measures are, she can't develop the goals.
So the approval would be of the measures proposed here.
Or whatever version the board decides. It's totally in the hands of the board. I think you've got to make an up or down decision on these are the goals we're proposing and adopting. We're voting on that. And we're voting then on the interim measures. And then from there, she and the team can begin the process of drafting the interim goals.
With the exception of 5.
So on the 17th, we would be voting on the interim measures. Because we were talking about adoption in January. Yeah, it's just, I'm happy you raised this just so we have some clarity.
That's why I just want to like name, and I don't think we need to solve this today, but I'm just trying to be as honest as possible about like, in order for the next level of the task to get done, which is to get this to completion of the interim goals, I think the board has to make the firm stake in the ground decision on here are the 5 goals. This is the language we're sort of landing on. We've agreed to this, no looking back. And here are the interim here are the interim measures. And then from there, the team can draft and you can go through this iteration process of trying to get the interim goals.
So are these interim measures fine? I thought I heard they're draft.
They're
but
draft.
They're proposed measures. They're proposed, but it's proposed to the board.
Correct. Yeah. These are all board decisions.
Okay. So, like, for example, goal number, let's look at it, 3, I'm sorry. Goal number 5,
We don't have that.
yeah,
Right, because that goal has not been finalized. Based on this conversation here, we were focused more on civics, if we're focused on SEL.
and that's what
how
you're
we're-
talking about.
Correct.
Right.
So you're saying like that kind of ambiguity, unless it's clarified by December 17th, you can't have something by the 17th.
This is why I think why the team felt like they couldn't bring any interim goals proposed forward because they weren't sure. I know that I agree in the conversation with Steve's point that the board said like roughly here's where we are, but like roughly here's where we are is different than final decision here's where we are. And once the team has the goals and then the interim measures, then they can start to draft a set of interim goals for each one of those.
So maybe just as a practical matter to help out here, it would be good to identify where there's some mushiness still before December 17th, just to be, so everyone here is clear on what is not yet nailed down. Would that help the board here, so that when you go into the meeting on the 17th, you can be clear on what you absolutely have to decide? Because I didn't realize that. I'm just trying to help you get this on schedule.
Yeah, from my understanding, and I could be missing stuff, I think there's a bunch of questions that we're gonna collectively email to Dr. Dillon about the interim goals, right? Maybe not a bunch. It's actually-
Interim measures.
Interim measures, I'm sorry,
Right.
interim measures, right? And I do think it was really, goal 5 that we have to decide around by the 7th.
Okay,
That's what I am understanding, and then also deciding about the guardrails. Do we want the preamble and the guardrail?
and then also guardrail 3, do you want to include some kind of restorative justice or?
I think if you were to go, and Lisa took copious notes here, so we could all circle up. I just think that there's more unanswered questions than we might realize that we just need to make some decisions on. That doesn't need to happen before the 17th, but by the close of the 17th, I think if the PBSD team can have that, then I think we've got a shot at January. If we can't get to that point, then I think January is just going to be nearly impossible for the team.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to identify what isn't clearly nailed down, and it sounds like.
Like, for example, like this idea of guardrail 1 about sort of the superintendent should not allow educators or leaders. I think there was a lot of discussion there about whether or not sort of those are the right interim measures, smart measures to do that. And there's some discussion about the order of these things. And so we just need to like make those decisions. And I think people were.
Well, you have an awareness. I think it's a little clearer that what you have to decide on the 17th if you want it to move. But that makes sense.
So now I might be misunderstood. I thought you said that the guardrails could be provisional as of the 17th, but the goals really need to be locked down.
Sorry, I should have been more precise. In order for the team, if the goal is to get this firm final on the website, these are our goals and guardrails and interim goals and guardrails, then everything that's on this document needs a final decision so that the next layer of work, which is interim goals and guardrails, can all be drafted. None of that is drafted.
Right.
And so that I'm just pointing out that isn't something that just happens in 24 hours.
Right.
And like it's going to take the team several weeks to do that. And I'm panicking that maybe there's some unclear expectations that this can happen for January. The team is going to be clear, I have talked to them privately, people are going to shoot for that. They need final decisions from this board in order to prepare those materials.
By
Can
the
I quickly
17th.
go over what I heard everyone say, and then we can know exactly what needs to be
I think
firmed
that
up?
would be prudent, yeah.
For goal one, there was a bunch of questions that were answered in real time, and everyone felt good with the answers that they got. There was no question left unanswered. So for goal one, it's firmed up, interim measures seem to be agreed upon. For goal two, Corey brought up the question of whether or not there's a way to measure how K-8 models will impact or how they'll be measured successfully. Corey, is that what I heard you say? How do the
there's
K-8 models, are they gonna be measured for success?
And that, goal
And that's-
3,
That's for goal three.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then for goal two, there was no questions left unanswered. For goal four, the question that came up was, is this gonna go for all high schools? Lisa and Drew answered together that by the time the board's ready to measure CTE programs, every high school will have a CTE, so that was kind of answered. The other question, then there was a question around, should there be a goal around how do students continue this work? Do they end up in the field? Do they continue education? And should we measure that? So that's the interim, we're playing with whether that should be an interim goal.
An interim measure.
Measure, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
like whether they get a job.
Yes.
For
See,
continuing
I heard that
education.
I mean, the way I heard that was Corey was proposing a different goal. But maybe I
no.
just
No,
misunderstood.
it's a measure.
It was a measure, but I was questioning if it is by way a different goal, right? If it's appropriated there.
But I think what Drew is saying is decide.
Decide. It doesn't matter to
No,
me. Like
I
that's
think
your
we
call as a
are
board.
saying that.
I think
Yeah, measure.
I think
I don't wanna
we
change
all that goal. agreed that we're sticking with these 5 goals. We're just trying to make sure the measures are appropriate.
So maybe add a measure regarding achievement of the.
If they find it
Continued,
appropriate.
Yeah.
job or continued education in that field. With goal 5, we have a question around, should it be civics curriculum and whether that's empathy, ethics, social justice with a critical lens? How are we connecting civics to, the social justice aspect in action? How are they showing that they're doing these things? And then possibly moral leadership, that was another thing that Corey said, civics and moral leadership. So some way to connect the civics to the social justice in action.
And then connected to all of those that you just read, Nish, I think that the PBSC team thinks at least that they're still waiting on feedback from AJ about those things.
They are,
Oh, the
Just
feedback
helping.
is from AJ.
That's what the PBSC team thinks is happening, and so if we could help like move that along, or if you need my support, but I think making sure that the board has access to that feedback, so that it can be considered, and you can feel like you have the information you need to make
the final.
Are those feedback on the assessments? Drew?
Yes, that's my understanding of what is happening, but the team might know.
Well, the interim measures, like
Yeah.
whether you're gonna, how you're gonna do it.
That's what I'm
All of
sorry.
the-
Yeah. So can you get that, like, from AJ by the
AJ's
17th?
sending it to them, they're gonna send it to us.
Okay.
So as soon as that happens, we'll be able to,
And what about all the other questions that you read? Is that gonna be resolved at the meeting on the 17th, or?
We're gonna send these questions to Dr. Dillon, who will answer leadership, and we'll disperse that information to the board.
Prior
before
to the
17th.
Can I make a
Um,
suggestion?
I just wanted to finish
Oh,
to make
sorry,
sure I
sorry.
heard everything.
Sorry.
The guardrails, we wanna rearrange them with 2 or 4 being at the top, 1 being the last guardrail. With a proposal to, add the remix to the top of the, guardrail, and do a hybrid model where they both exist. With the second guardrail possibly adding and will promote transparency in PBSD operations. Steve proposed that to speak to, community call for transparency around all PBSD operations. Guardrail 1, we're wondering if there, an interim around, teachers who get support, then they won't be allowed in CSI schools, not specifically just not being allowed in CSI schools if they have support well. Guardrail 2, it feels like it's not broad enough, it's written to a specific school, not really involving the whole community. Should that language be tightened for guardrail 2? Guardrail 3, thinking of adding an interim goal around restorative justice. Also some worries around, this guardrail being used to police our students and maybe the language shifting some. Adding the bullying data as an interim measure. And also adding language around disproportionate to the suspension rate kind of measure. Guardrail 4, just raise that these interim measures are, around student kind of focused data, and whether or not we can hold the superintendent accountable with these, interim measures. Yeah, those are the guardrails. Sarah and Charlie elevated that they are in favor of the shall not kind of, framing. Also, Charlie elevated really advocating for Steve's reframing of adding both, just to be very clear for the superintendent, and what's expected of him and his team. Is there anything that feels like was left out? Are there any questions rising?
I believe the chairman had mentioned that to add on the first guardrail to add teacher, staff, and administrator.
I think it's added.
To have it be, echoed to the guardrail, not just the remix.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Right, to have the language from the
Yeah.
remix be echoed in the guardrail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
you may
that's
have-
just consistent.
you may have said this, but just the reordering of the guardrails as well.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
2 or 4 being first, 1 being last.
Can I make a suggestion? If at all possible, instead of, if the goal is to try to move this forward on the meeting the 17th, instead of getting a bunch of questions together and sending it to us, if we could have a draft document, whether Dr. Dillon puts that together or you all put that together, if we could pull it together into a single document that we can then discuss and vote on, and then if we need to make adjustments on the spot of language or something like that, that we can do that, rather than, because I just feel like if we're having a wide-ranging conversation on the 17th,
Yeah,
You're
we're much
saying
like-
take the proposals and integrate them into a draft.
I think that's what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
I think that's my
Yeah.
hope. That's the cleanest way to get here, is to have a clean, polished copy. And we're talking about stuff on the edges. But I think someone also suggested that there's a lot of pre-work that needs to happen now, between now and the 17th, to make that happen. Just to name, obviously, Dr. Dillon and the superintendent who had previous commitments, we need to watch this video recording, take the notes. And there's still, just as a listener, I think there's still some fuzziness. And so I don't know that they're going to be able to polish everything and bring forward the draft without support from the board. And so just think through what is the support that the board is going to provide to the PPSD team doing this work so they can bring as clean of a copy as possible. But I think it's going to take some collaboration and communication.
So I'm gonna put these notes together, as they're waiting for feedback from AJ. I'm gonna send these over to Dr. Dillon by tomorrow, so she understands what we talked about in this meeting and the areas that we're unsure about and language that we want tightened up, by tomorrow. So our end will be done by tomorrow.
And what I can do on the guardrail side is I can pull together, Steve, your suggestion in terms of like preamble for thou shalt not, and also incorporating the feedback that we heard tonight into a document that we will send to you all by Friday. So you all can take time and look at that as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you know what, sis, I'll wait till Friday till you get that done.
Yep.
We'll put that with the notes document and send that to Dr. Dillon's team, so you're not being inundated with emails? What do you think?
I'm just worried, like 17th is Wednesday,
Yes,
Yeah.
next Wednesday.
like, so what materials need to be posted Friday or Monday?
Monday.
Monday.
Well, I mean, I think if Dr. Dillon can get the notes about the goals
Then
tomorrow,
I'll send it tomorrow.
right? I can make this happen. I can make the guardrails happen by tomorrow. As well, the guardrails feel a bit more us, like we have to sort that stuff out. I know there's, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, great,
I
okay.
think we can do that, and if Dr. Dillon.
I was just envisioning her
that-
getting all these notes and trying to make sense of this and trying to clean this up, and I just was
There's
like, this is not
not really
gonna happen.
much here, to be
But
honest.
if her job is the goals and interim
Interim
measures
measures.
based on that, then I think that's.
Yeah, and we'll do the guardrails, and then just to be clear, so on the 17th, we're gonna be looking at a finalized, well, a almost finalized document of goals and guardrails that incorporates the feedback from tonight, and then we'd be voting to, what would we do with that? We're gonna vote to, not adopt it, but a vote to approve for them to continue finalization.
Because I
We would be
think-
voting to adopt it.
That's what I assumed. I assumed you were gonna be voting to adopt it, but as long as, like, you all have made a decision, then she has the clarity she needs, and the superintendent has the clarity he needs to then go and turn these into, interim goals and programs.
So would the interim goals and guardrails be a second adoption in January?
Yes.
Got it, okay, that, I think that's where some of the confusion was coming from.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the process from what I heard from the coach. I just like, listen, like we have this workshop, it was October, November, I'm just like naming now in January. I just don't think this is gonna happen like in a week or two. I think the team will do what they can, but I imagine that there's gonna be just as much sort of feedback and discussion on the interim goals, and we'll see where we can go.
We're using, I feel like you're using interim goals and guardrails and interim measures interchangeably. Are they two separate
Two
things?
separate things. The measures are there to say like,
How are they measuring?
yeah, so like that is what like then the team is gonna take those interim measures and they're going to develop proposed interim goals and guardrails based on the measures that are there, but they're gonna use those assessments or those tools that are listed.
Okay,
So there's a third section that's gonna be done.
No, the section,
Yeah, I didn't think so.
the interim measures are gonna be modified into actual interim goals. So they're gonna be fleshed out now. Right now, they're
Oh,
just,
percentages, what
Yes.
what you gave us
They're-
yesterday.
They're just a list of things like they're going to.
Right.
What we talked about
Yes,
yesterday.
yeah.
Okay.
I know, I was getting a bit confused.
I was like,
So the interim goal will say, using this tool, there will be this
Right.
result.
okay.
exactly.
And yeah, I think it's important to know that those are being developed. They're just not in front of us tonight. It's not like they have to arise from the dead. Oh, no, like they actually like,
They're rough.
yeah,
Just
they
to-
are rough, but they do exist and they're working on them.
Right.
And, cause it almost sounds like a whole separate process. And
It's started.
it's already, the work is started.
Or if we have
Yeah.
something and then.
No, I'm stretching that.
No, okay,
For
sorry.
once, I don't even.
Will the draft be accessible on Monday?
The draft will be accessible
To me.
to the public.
Right.
On the agenda,
It should be, right? I forget the rules about this.
72 hours.
If the agenda is published, yeah.
48 hours,
48
right,
hours.
but like, so for this meeting, we didn't have access to this.
Because today is special meeting, so it's not like,
So that's
it's not,
different.
Nothing was
it's
put on
not,
there.
nothing was public, yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is if it's gonna be, or my concern is if it's voted on Wednesday, sorry, Drew.
Yeah, no, I
If it's
just,
voted on Wednesday, then I feel like the board will already have determined yay or nay on it, so when I, as a community member, as a parent, come to speak, I feel like it's gonna be a waste of time, or it's gonna be seen as a waste of time, and I think that's very problematic.
I think we need to, oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, that is that's what people are gonna probably feel. I think it's hard because we've given so much time for public to give feedback on, or at least 2 months, where in different pockets where we have invited community to come and give feedback, there has to be a point where we're like, we have to move into finalization. Otherwise, we won't be ready to start measuring these goals and guardrails come September of next year. So I hear you, like definitely hear you. And we do have to get this work pushed forward somehow. And maybe we can share the survey a little more, I don't know, before next week.
The survey's a little rough.
Okay,
Like, I didn't take it because I was like, I don't know what's going on.
yeah,
As someone that's come to meetings and has been spoken to about the goals and guardrails, I read that and I was like, I'm not even, I would rather speak at public comment, honestly, than fill out that survey.
That's good feedback, yeah, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I also think, some amount of this has to go into our individual roles as school board members, right? And, getting into the community, getting our monthly meetings set up and creating those, like, there's 10 of us, we could have 10 separate spaces to communicate with community, families and parents each month, right? Which would open up so much more feedback opportunities, right? And so that's something that I'm gonna try to like start setting stuff on the board going into next year and just be like doing like, I'm hoping in January I'll do at least 3 focus groups, right? And have like a community meeting every month for the rest of the year, right? So I think if we all kind of bring that kind of energy, there'll never be an issue. That would be what, 12 times 10 community opportunities, right, in the year. So yeah, that's kind of like only so much of our board time can be spent on community feedback, and some of it has to be a personal kind of responsibility as a board member.
That's what I did have something to say. I mean, there's nothing precluding us from, if at public comment, somebody brings something up, there's nothing precluding us from saying before we take a vote on this, we're gonna have a discussion. As was just raised in public comment, wow, it really seems like this is not worded the way that this is not being read the way that we intended it to be read.
Right.
Sure.
I make a motion that we amend this, you know what I mean, and then we hash it out,
Absolutely.
and so I don't think that public comment will be wasted at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we need to do, speaking to Chairman Jones's point, we have an opportunity right now as a board to promote next Wednesday. And I think this is where we all need to step in to being board members and get on either social media or in our communities and telling people like, when it's posted on Monday and the documents are public, like getting people to come out to public comment. We can tell people to come out as of now, we just won't have a document in front of them, right? But we definitely need to let people know, and I know we have been trying to share and do that work, but let's make a final push to get people to that meeting. Because like we saw Aubrey with the 3-pointer coming in, you know what I mean? Like something like that could change how we feel. Hopefully, folks feel what we have is aligned, right? Because we have been doing listening and we do have to move towards finalization so we can make progress, right? And make sure the district has the tools they need to do this work. And we have to hold that tension of like, we need to listen to community at the same time. Chairman Jones?
Has there been any more conversations around the board getting its own personal staff?
Not to my knowledge, but we can talk with President Stevens.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, thing. Like, again, I work for a board, we have 17 staff members that are around the clock doing the work that the board, tasked us to do. And I think that I've just onboarded my 5th intern, and, to try to help me with capacity. I do guest lectures at some universities, so I can recruit there. But, it's even a challenge managing them, right? Like giving them new assignments, getting them onboarded, showing them how to, in tune with the board work, right? And then, raising money to be able to pay them, right? When really we haven't even been able to do much other than, kind of get them onboarded onto what we're doing. So I think having some staff would be really helpful in helping us all get into the community more.
Are we okay if we move, towards adjournment?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the 17th. Thank you all.
See you.
Thank you.
Oh, just,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.